Hello and welcome to my YouTube. This YouTube is remembering the year 1944. I was born in Harlingen, Texas. My mother was a 17-year-old war bride. My father had been a gunnery instructor at the Harlingen Army Gunnery School. That's how I happened to be born in Texas. The day I was born, my father was 5,300 miles away, serving with the 303rd Bombardment Group, the original Hells Angels, stationed in Cambridgeshire, England. Only 24% of my father's B-17 bomber group would survive the war, so I consider myself very lucky to have grown up with a father. I would be over 1 year old before my father ever actually saw me in person. And this is the oldest picture ever taken of me and my mother. Franklin D. Roosevelt was president, serving his third term when I was born. George C. Marshall became the very first five-star general of World War II. The Battle of the Bulge began the year I was born in Europe. In Italy, the Battle for Monte Cassino. The Great Escape occurred when 76 Royal Air Force prisoners of war escaped by tunnel from a German prisoner of war camp. Of course, they later made a movie about it called The Great Escape. The Battle of Leningrad began in Russia that year, one of the most horrific battles of World War II. The first V-2 rocket attacks against London started that year. On June 6, 1944, D-Day invasion occurred, the beginning of the end of the war. My father's bomb group participated in D-Day. They got them up at midnight and began prepping the planes with bombs, and their mission was to bombard and destroy all of the bridges and the roads leading up to the Normandy beaches. In the Pacific, the Battle of Leyte Gulf occurred the year I was born, one of the biggest battles in the world. It was the last battle of battleship versus battleship. General MacArthur returns to the Philippines on October 20th, as he had promised. When he was forced to leave, he said, quote, "I shall return," and he did. Hitler survives an assassination attempt made by his own major generals. They put a bomb in a briefcase and they set it down at the table beside him. Unfortunately, some other officer moved the briefcase, and when the bomb went off, it blew up the room and injured everybody, but it didn't kill Hitler. On October 14th, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel commits suicide by poison. This is probably the best general in the war, certainly one of the greatest generals that Germany ever had. He was implicated in the plot to assassinate Hitler, and he was given a choice, and he chose suicide to protect his family and his staff members. Anne Frank and her family are sent to Auschwitz concentration camp in 1944. Jackie Robinson is court-martialed for refusing to move to the back of an army bus. Now, some of you youngsters may not know who he was. He was one of the greatest baseball players to ever put on the uniform. Played for the Dodgers, and he is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Smokey the Bear was first introduced. Only you can prevent forest fires. That was his famous line. The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet debuts on radio that year. On November 21st, Florence Foster Jenkins sings to a sellout crowd at Carnegie Hall. Now, my friends, Florence Foster Jenkins will go down in history as the worst opera singer ever. She was filthy rich, so her husband indulged her fantasy of becoming an opera singer. He would buy seats and they would sell out these concert halls for her to sing at, but she was atrocious. One critic says she could sing everything but notes. I've made a little video of her actual singing so you can judge for yourself. Here she is singing Queen of the Night. I hesitate to say enjoy. I'll just say endure. The movie To Have and Have Not came out in 1944, starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Look at this lovely couple. Humphrey Bogart was 43 years old when this movie was made. He was right in his prime. How old do you think Lauren Bacall is? The answer? She is 19 years old. She's a teenager. Yeah, one of the most sultry actresses on the screen was a mere teenager when this movie was made. But she had one of the most famous lines. People still remember it today. And the line went something like this. You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow. That was her line. The Academy Award for Best Picture that year went to Casablanca, starring Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. Now, this movie has probably the most misquoted line in movie history. Everybody says that Sam said, Bogart delivered the line, "Play it again, Sam." He never said that. Let me show you what they said. In one scene, Ingrid Bergman says, "Play it, Sam. Play as time goes by." Much later in the movie, Bogart delivers this line. You played it for her, you can play it for me. If she can stand it, I can. Play it. But no one ever said, "Play it again, Sam." The movie National Velvet came out that year, starring a very young Elizabeth Taylor. This is the movie that launched her career. Who was born when I was born in 1944? Gladys Knight. That's Gladys Knight and the Pips. Well, this is Gladys Knight. Diana Ross and the Supremes. Michael Douglas was born that year. And Danny DeVito. In November, President Roosevelt is reelected for a fourth time. As you may know, we've changed the U.S. Constitution to prevent this now. You can only serve twice, and that's because of Roosevelt. The Pulitzer Prize-winning play Harvey opened on Broadway. Harvey is this invisible rabbit that only the star can see. It turns out when I was in college, when I was doing my student teaching at a high school, because of all of my theater work when I was a college student, I volunteered to help direct the high school play, and they did the play Harvey. The average annual salary for a man was $2,670 back then. There were no new cars in 1944. All car production for civilians had ceased because everything was devoted to the war effort. No new cars. A new home cost about $3,400. Something called the stratoplates are the very first frozen dinners on a plate. Now, here's the deal. These were made specifically for the servicemen who were on these long, long flights across the ocean. They needed to feed them, and so they got the idea, well, we'll take these metal plates and we'll freeze the food, freeze it frozen solid, and then we'll make this little oven. This technically was the first air fryer because it circulated hot air, and it was made to operate on airplanes. So these frozen meals were served to the soldiers and the sailors who were in these airplanes going from the United States over to the Pacific Islands or over to Europe. Gasoline was 15 cents a gallon. There were only about 15,000 TV sets in America, and there were TV stations in just 4 cities: New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Schenectady. That's it. And this is what a TV looked like. It had a round screen. So there were movies. What were the top grossing movies? What movies made the most money during World War II in 1944? They were, in rank order, number 1, Bing Crosby in Going My Way. Number 2, Meet Me in St. Louis, starring Judy Garland. Number 3, Two Girls and a Sailor. Don't remember this one. Van Johnson, June Allison. Remember those stars. Bathing Beauty, starring, of all people, Red Skelton and Esther Williams. For you young people, Esther Williams was famous for swimming. She looked good in a swimming suit, and in all of her movies, she dives into a swimming pool, and there are all of these synchronized women swimmers. That was her claim to fame. She made these swimming movies. I had no idea that Red Skelton starred in a movie, but there it is. Wilson. This was a movie about President Wilson, a biography of his life. Didn't know. So there was no TV basically, but there certainly was radio. What were the most popular radio shows? Number one, Fibber McGee and Molly, a comedy. Number two, something called Mail Call, and stars like Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, and they would come on, and they would there were comedians and singers and bands. It was basically a musical comedy variety radio show. Number three, Beat the Band, and this was bands. Bands would come and play. Number four, The Bell Telephone Hour, drama. Number five, The Benny Goodman Recordings Show. There's no doubt about what they played on this radio show. Food rationing. You couldn't just go to the grocery store and buy anything you wanted. America was rationing food because we had to feed all of those hundreds of thousands of soldiers and sailors scattered all over the world. So they implemented food rationing in the United States. And I won't get technical, but the way it worked is you were given these books of stamps, and you only had so many stamps and so much food that you could buy each week. And so things like sugar and flour and cooking oil were all highly rationed. And so the housewives and the mothers of America had to be very, very careful in how they planned their menus because they might not have enough stamps to buy what they needed to cook. So food rationing was all over America, and it started in 1941 and was in force when I was born in 1944. There were different colors. The red ones were for meat. Meat was also highly rationed. Gasoline was highly rationed. Class A drivers, which was the general public, they only had somewhere between 3 and 5 gallons per week, and that's it. If you ran out of gas, your car just sat in the garage. Class B drivers, these were people like factory workers who needed their cars to work. They got more gas because we needed those workers to go to those factories to build those bombs and tanks and airplanes. Have you really tried to save gas by getting into a car club? So they encouraged drivers. They also said, you know what, if we slow everybody down, we won't burn as much gas. So there was a nationwide speed limit of 35 miles an hour set up by the federal government. Things like tin became very precious because our tin supply was shut off because of the Japanese. They controlled that area of the world where we got our tin. So things like tin cans became very, very difficult. And there was a huge recycling effort for things like tin cans because we didn't have any tin mines in America. It all came from overseas. Shoes were rationed. You could only buy 3 pairs of shoes per person per year, and you had to have a stamp for that. Nylons and silks were rationed. We needed those things for parachutes. And I saw one study that said a pair of silk hose could cost as much as $158 in today's dollars. So, women were very, very protective of their silk hose because they couldn't buy any more. Not that they even were available, but they just couldn't afford them. So what did the ladies do? Well, that'll come a little bit later. During the war, most students dropped out of school at the age of 14. So the high schools didn't have many students. Civilians were allowed to keep 5 tires per vehicle, and they had to surrender the rest. They could only get replacement tires by applying to their local rationing board. The board would issue certificates for vehicles that meet certain qualifications, such as public transportation, fire trucks, and ambulances. The board could also issue certificates for retreading tires. So tires were highly rationed. And you didn't have much gas, so people weren't driving around very much. Here's a poster. They've got more places to go than you. Save rubber. Check your tires now. So, back to the silk stockings. So what women did is they bought this makeup and they painted their legs with this leg makeup to make it look like they were wearing hoses. And they would take an eyeliner pencil and they would draw a black line down the back of their legs to simulate the seam of the silk stocking. Okay? Coppertone sunscreen was introduced way back in 1944. Lord knows, I grew up with my family. We had a boat, and every weekend we went boating and water skiing. I have put on gallons of Coppertone in my youth. Glenn Miller's plane went missing over the English Channel. Glenn Miller, one of the greatest band conductors of all time, one of the most popular bands in America. His plane went down somewhere over the English Channel, and we lost him. As you see, he was in the Army. In Hartford, Connecticut, there was a fire at a circus, and over 100 children died. 176 people altogether, but of that 176, 100 were children. Can you imagine the horror? So, what were the most popular musical groups back in 1944? Number 1, Bing Crosby, probably the most famous man in America, next to the president. Number 2, Jimmy Dorsey and his orchestra. Number 3, Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians. Number 4, Harry James and his orchestra. You see a pattern here, don't you? And number 5, the Andrews Sisters. One of their most famous songs was Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, so here they are. And in a movie, they dressed up like this. This is probably from that movie, and they sang that song, Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. What were the most popular songs of 1944? And this was based upon record sales and plays on the radio. Not my opinion, it's what the data says. Number 1, Bing Crosby's Swinging on a Star. Number 2, the Mills Brothers, You Always Hurt the One You Love. Pretty song. Number 3, Harry James, I'll Get By as Long as I Have You. Number 4, Jimmy Dorsey and his orchestra, Besame Mucho. I remember this one. I'll play it later. And number 5, Dinah Shore, I'll Walk Alone. Many of us remember the Dinah Shore TV show growing up. I do. And now I'd like to play 3 songs from 1944.
Give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me in. Let me be by myself in the evening breeze, listening to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me off forever, but I ask you please, don't fence me in. I want to ride to the ridge where the west commences, gaze at the moon until I lose my senses. Can't look at hovels and I can't stand fences. Don't fence me in. Give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me in. Let me be by myself in the evening breeze, listening to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me off forever, but I ask you please, don't fence me in. I want to ride to the west where the west commences, gaze at the moon until I lose my senses. Can't look at hobbles and I can't stand fences. Don't fence me in. Oh, Papa, don't you fence me in.